What if I told you there are towns in the United States where homes sell for as little as $22,000? Not because they're luxury bargains, but because life there comes with serious challenges most people never see. When we hear prices that low, curiosity kicks in immediately. How is that possible in one of the wealthiest countries in the world? And more importantly, what does daily life actually look like in places like these? Another uncomfortable but necessary question is this. Why do these towns exist at all? In a country filled with opportunity, infrastructure, and modern convenience, there are communities struggling with conditions that feel shockingly outdated. These places are not hidden because they don't exist. They're hidden because they're rarely discussed, rarely filmed, and often misunderstood. Before going any further, it's important to clarify something. Terms like third world conditions are often used online for shock value, but they don't accurately describe the people living in these towns. What they really point to are economic decline, aging infrastructure, limited services, and long-term neglect. The people here are not the problem. The circumstances are. That distinction matters because this video isn't about mocking or exploiting struggling communities. It's about understanding how parts of America were left behind, how housing prices collapsed as a result, and why these towns still exist despite the hardships. Many of these towns were once thriving. Some were built around factories, mines, railroads, or manufacturing hubs that supported thousands of workers. When industries moved away or shut down, jobs disappeared almost overnight. As people left to find work elsewhere, tax revenue dropped, public services weakened, and maintenance became harder to afford. Over time, the decline compounded. One of the biggest shocks for outsiders is the condition of housing. In many of these towns, homes are cheap not because they're small, but because they require serious repairs. Aging electrical systems, outdated plumbing, structural damage, and lack of modern insulation are common. Some homes have been passed down for generations without major upgrades, while others were abandoned entirely and later sold at extremely low prices. Infrastructure is another major issue. Roads may be poorly maintained. Public transportation might be non-existent. Access to healthcare can require long drives. Grocery stores are often limited, leading to what many describe as food deserts. These challenges don't show up in real estate listings, but they shape everyday life in powerful ways. Another hook that surprises people is how these towns still function despite everything. Schools still open their doors. Local shops still operate. Neighbors still look out for one another. Life doesn't stop, it adapts. That resilience is often overlooked when outsiders focus only on decay rather than survival. Low home prices also attract attention from investors, flippers, and people looking for extreme affordability. While this can bring some improvement, it can also create tension. Longtime residents sometimes worry about displacement, while newcomers underestimate the cost and effort required to live comfortably in these areas. A $22,000 home may seem like a dream, but the reality often includes thousands more in repairs and ongoing challenges. What makes these towns especially complex is that they don't fit neatly into headlines. They aren't ghost towns, and they aren't booming success stories either. They exist in a gray area, populated, functional, but struggling. That makes them easy to ignore and hard to fix. This video isn't about judging these towns. It's about revealing a side of America that many people don't realize still exists. Places where the cost of living is low, but so are opportunities. Where homes are cheap, but daily life can be demanding. And where people continue forward not because conditions are ideal, but because it's home. In the next part, we'll start looking at why housing prices dropped so drastically in these towns, and what those numbers really mean beyond the headline price. How does a house in the United States drop to a price that feels almost unbelievable? When people hear about homes selling for $22,000, the first assumption is often that there must be something hidden or misleading. The truth is more complicated and more revealing than a single price tag can show. One of the biggest reasons housing prices collapse in certain towns is job loss. Many of these communities were built around one major employer or industry. When factories closed, mines shut down, or manufacturing moved overseas, thousands of jobs disappeared at once. Without steady income, people left in search of work, and demand for housing dropped sharply. When demand disappears, prices follow. Another factor is population decline. In some towns, the population has been shrinking for decades. Fewer residents mean fewer buyers, fewer renters, and fewer resources for maintenance and improvement. Homes that once had multiple offers now sit on the market for months or even years. Eventually, prices fall to a level where sellers are simply trying to recover something rather than profit. Infrastructure plays a major role as well. Aging water systems, outdated electrical grids, and poorly maintained roads reduce property value significantly. Buyers factor in not just the cost of the house, but the cost of living there. When repairs and upgrades become the buyer's responsibility, even a cheap home can feel expensive. As a result, prices continue to drop until someone is willing to take on the risk. Another hook many people overlook is taxes and local funding. When property values fall, local governments collect less tax revenue. This makes it harder to fund schools, emergency services, and public works. Over time, this creates a cycle where declining services make the town less attractive, which further reduces property values. It's not sudden, it's gradual and difficult to reverse. Housing conditions also affect pricing more than location alone. In struggling towns, many homes are decades old and haven't been updated in generations. Roofs may need replacement. Heating systems may be inefficient or outdated. Insulation may be minimal or non-existent. These issues don't always appear in listings, but become clear after inspection. Buyers adjust their offers accordingly or walk away entirely. Another reason prices sink is limited access to financing. In some low-value areas, banks are hesitant to issue traditional mortgages. This reduces the pool of potential buyers even further. When financing isn't easily available, sellers are forced to lower prices to attract cash buyers or investors, pushing values down even more. It's also important to understand that cheap housing doesn't automatically mean unsafe or abandoned. Many of these homes are still lived in and maintained to the best of the owner's ability. The price reflects market conditions, not the worth of the people living there. That distinction is critical when discussing these towns responsibly. Low prices often attract attention from people looking for extreme affordability or a fresh start. While this can bring new life into a community, it also comes with challenges. New residents may underestimate the difficulty of finding work, accessing healthcare, or dealing with limited services. What looks like an opportunity on paper can feel very different in practice. Another overlooked factor is location isolation. Many of these towns are far from major cities or highways. Long commutes, limited transportation options, and fewer nearby job markets reduce desirability. Even if a home is structurally sound, its distance from opportunity lowers its value in the broader housing market. Despite all of this, homes continue to sell, even at very low prices. That tells us something important. These towns still matter to someone. Whether it's long-time residents staying put, families with deep roots, or newcomers willing to adapt, life continues. The market doesn't erase a town just because prices fall. Understanding why homes became this cheap helps remove the shock factor and replace it with context. These prices aren't random. They're the result of long-term economic shifts, policy decisions, and demographic changes that unfolded over decades, not months. In the next part, we'll look at what daily life is actually like in these towns, beyond housing prices, and how residents adapt to limited resources while maintaining community and routine. What does life actually feel like in towns where homes sell for the price of a used car? It's easy to focus on headlines and numbers, but daily life in these communities is far more complex than a low listing price suggests. Behind every cheap home is a routine, a family, and a way of living shaped by both limitation and resilience. One of the first things visitors notice is how different the pace of life feels. In many of these towns, days move slowly, not by choice but by circumstance. Job opportunities are limited, businesses operate on reduced hours, and long commutes are common for those who are employed. This slower rhythm can feel calm to outsiders, but for residents, it often reflects a lack of options rather than a lifestyle preference. Another reality is access or the lack of it. Grocery stores may be few and far between, sometimes requiring long drives for fresh food. Healthcare access can be limited, with the nearest hospital or specialist hours away. Public transportation is often minimal or non-existent, making car ownership a necessity rather than a convenience. These factors quietly shape everyday decisions in ways many people never have to consider. A powerful but often ignored hook is how much residents rely on one another. In towns with fewer resources, community becomes essential. Neighbors share tools, check in on each other, and step in during emergencies. This informal support system fills gaps left by shrinking public services. While conditions may be difficult, social connections are often strong, built on necessity and familiarity. Housing conditions also play a major role in daily life. Many residents live in older homes that require constant maintenance. Repairs are often done gradually, based on what can be afforded at the time. Instead of major renovations, people focus on keeping homes functional, fixing leaks, patching roofs, and maintaining heat during cold months. Comfort becomes relative, shaped by experience rather than comparison. Employment in these towns is another challenge. Jobs may be seasonal, part-time, or located far outside town limits. Some residents work multiple jobs to make ends meet. Others rely on remote work if internet access allows, though connectivity can be unreliable. This instability affects everything from income planning to long-term goals. Education is also impacted by economic decline. Schools remain open, but funding limitations can affect resources, class sizes, and extracurricular opportunities. Teachers often wear multiple hats, and schools function as community centers as much as educational institutions. For families, education becomes both a priority and a concern, influencing whether they stay or eventually leave. Despite these challenges, life doesn't stop. People celebrate holidays, attend local events, and maintain routines. There are still moments of normalcy. Barbecues, school games, community gatherings that remind residents they're not defined solely by hardship. These moments are often quieter and smaller, but they matter deeply. Another important hook is how outsiders often misunderstand these towns. Low prices and visible decline can lead to assumptions that life is unsafe or chaotic. In reality, many of these communities are stable, predictable, and close-knit. The challenges are structural and economic, not a reflection of constant disorder. Mental and emotional resilience plays a huge role in daily survival. Living in a town with limited opportunity requires adaptability and patience. People learn to manage expectations, prioritize essentials, and find meaning in small victories. This resilience doesn't make the challenges disappear, but it allows life to continue with dignity. It's also worth noting that not everyone in these towns wants to leave. Some stay because of family ties, affordability, or attachment to place. Others see potential, believing that slow improvement is possible, even if progress is measured in years rather than months. These perspectives are rarely shown, but are crucial to understanding the full picture. Daily life in these towns is not defined by the price of a home alone. It's shaped by long-term economic shifts, limited access, and strong social bonds. The experience is neither entirely bleak nor secretly ideal. It exists somewhere in between, where hardship and normalcy coexist. In the next part, we'll explore how these towns are viewed from the outside, by investors, newcomers, and media, and what happens when attention finally arrives. What happens when towns that have been ignored for decades suddenly become visible? When headlines highlight ultra-cheap homes and social media starts pointing cameras towards struggling communities, attention arrives fast, but not always gently. For many towns with extremely low housing prices, visibility brings both opportunity and tension at the same time. One major hook is how investors react. Low prices attract people looking for rental properties, flips, or long-term speculation. On paper, Buying a home for $22,000 looks like an incredible opportunity. But many investors quickly realize that renovation costs, limited rental demand, and ongoing maintenance can outweigh the initial savings. This gap between expectation and reality shapes how outside money interacts with these towns. Another shift happens when newcomers arrive seeking affordability rather than profit. Some are retirees on fixed incomes, others are people priced out of larger cities. These newcomers often bring optimism and fresh energy, but also face steep learning curves. Adjusting to limited services, fewer job options, and slower infrastructure upgrades can be more challenging than anticipated. Media attention is another double-edged sword. Videos and articles can raise awareness about real issues, like aging infrastructure and economic neglect, but they can also oversimplify life in these towns. When stories focus only on decay or shock value, they risk reinforcing stereotypes instead of encouraging understanding. Residents often feel conflicted, grateful for attention, yet frustrated by how their home is portrayed. A critical hook here is how change happens unevenly. One renovated house doesn't transform an entire neighborhood. Progress in these towns is usually slow and localized. A reopened store, a repaired road, or a new community program can make a difference, but not overnight. Expecting rapid turnaround often leads to disappointment for outsiders and residents alike. Another important factor is displacement concerns. While prices are low, even small increases can impact longtime residents living on tight budgets. Property taxes, rent adjustments, or utility costs can rise as attention grows. For people who have stayed through decades of decline, sudden change can feel threatening rather than welcome. Balancing improvement with stability becomes a delicate challenge. Local governments also face pressure when attention arrives. Increased interest can highlight long-standing infrastructure issues that were previously ignored. At the same time, limited budgets make rapid improvement difficult. Officials must navigate between encouraging development and protecting residents, often with very few resources. What's often overlooked is how residents feel about outside judgment. Many people who live in these towns are aware of the challenges. They live them every day. What they don't always appreciate is being defined solely by hardship. When outsiders arrive expecting extreme conditions, it can create tension and misunderstanding rather than connection. Despite this, some towns do benefit from renewed interest. Small businesses may reopen. Community groups may receive funding or volunteers. Public spaces may see gradual improvements. These changes are rarely dramatic, but they matter. Progress here is incremental, not explosive. Another hook is how expectations shape outcomes. When people arrive hoping to fix a town quickly, frustration follows. When they arrive willing to listen, learn, and adapt, relationships form. The difference lies in understanding that these towns aren't projects, they're homes. Attention doesn't automatically solve long-standing problems, but it can start conversations that were long overdue. The challenge is ensuring those conversations include the voices of the people who already live there, rather than speaking over them. In the final part, we'll step back and look at the bigger picture, what these towns reveal about housing inequality and affordability in America, and why their stories matter beyond low price tags. What do towns with $22,000 homes really tell us about the United States? They tell a story that rarely fits into headlines. A story not just about cheap housing, but about economic shifts, uneven development, and communities adapting to long-term neglect. These towns aren't anomalies. They're indicators of deeper patterns that shape affordability and opportunity across the country. One of the most important hooks is that these towns challenge the idea that housing costs are purely a market issue. Prices don't fall this low without structural reasons. Job loss, population decline, limited investment, and aging infrastructure all intersect here. When we look at these towns, we're not seeing failure. We're seeing the outcome of decisions made over decades at multiple levels. Another revealing insight is how affordability comes with trade-offs. Low home prices don't exist in isolation. They often reflect limited access to healthcare, fewer educational resources, and fewer employment opportunities. This doesn't make these towns undesirable. It makes them complex. Understanding that complexity is essential to discussing housing honestly. These communities also expose a gap in how success is measured. Growth is often celebrated, while stability in small or struggling towns is overlooked. Yet many residents remain because they value familiarity, affordability, and connection. Their choice isn't ignorance, it's adaptation. These towns persist because people find ways to live within constraints rather than abandon them entirely. A powerful hook lies in how these places force us to rethink stereotypes. It's easy to label areas as rundown or forgotten, but those labels erase the people who keep them going. Schools still teach, shops still open, families still gather. Life continues even when conditions are far from ideal. Recognizing this helps shift the conversation from judgment to understanding. These towns also highlight the uneven nature of recovery. While some regions experience booming growth, others struggle just to maintain services. This imbalance isn't random. It reflects where investment flows and where it doesn't. Towns with extremely low housing prices sit at the far end of that spectrum, making them visible symbols of inequality within a single country. Another takeaway is that affordability alone doesn't solve housing problems. A cheap home doesn't guarantee quality of life, just as an expensive one doesn't guarantee happiness. These towns remind us that housing is deeply connected to employment, infrastructure, and community support. Without those elements, low prices become a symptom rather than a solution. There's also a lesson here for policymakers and planners. Revitalization isn't about sudden transformation. It's about sustained commitment. Improving roads, expanding healthcare access, supporting small businesses, and investing in education take time. These towns don't need saving. They need consistency. For viewers, the real value of learning about these towns isn't in finding a bargain. It's in gaining perspective. They show a side of America that exists quietly, without constant attention. Understanding their reality helps broaden conversations about affordability, opportunity, and responsibility. Ultimately, these towns remind us that behind every statistic is a lived experience. A low home price doesn't define a community. What defines it is how people adapt, support one another, and continue forward despite limitations. That resilience is rarely visible in listings or headlines, but it's there. As this video ends, the goal isn't to shock or sensationalize. It's to inform, to add nuance, and to encourage thoughtful discussion about housing and inequality in America. These towns matter, not because they're cheap, but because they tell a story that deserves to be understood.